Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today we're going to focus on a very serious issue in this community and others, of course, all others, and that is domestic violence. It is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so we brought some guests from Transitions to help us understand more about the issue and what we can do if we're in that situation or if we see someone else who is. My guests are Marcy Wright, who's the director, and Sylvia Freeman, who also works and helps women with that transition into the next phase of their life. Well, this is a hard thing to talk about, but you know what? It's been in the news so much lately.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think we're obviously all sensitized to it now because of the situation with Wright, the football player, where he was seen assaulting his fiancée in an elevator, and of course all of the drama that came behind that with the NFL and their response
and her response. It's a complicated.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of questions around, why subsequent to that did she actually marry him? And so there are a lot of things that are part of domestic violence that are difficult to talk about and challenging, but we feel that it's our job to come out and just dispel some myths, talk about what we experience working with women, men, and children who are survivors of domestic violence.
So is there a stereotype? I mean, is there a particular person who is more vulnerable or more affected by domestic violence?
I think that a lot of times what people think is that it happens in low economic families, but it clearly cuts across all socioeconomic lines. Clearly, Wright is not indigent.
Right.
And other families in the country that are wealthy also can experience domestic violence. What happens is often that survivors who have more of a socioeconomic means are able to sometimes leave a situation more quickly because they have access to resources. Whereas most of the clients we serve, most of them don't have that kind of access, and so they're more apt to turn to a community organization like ours.
Well, I think, it is that double-edged sword, though. While some of them have the resources, mm-hmm. they also may be covering it up even mm-hmm. more because of the status or where they are in the community.
Right,
I mean,
right.
in some ways, those families can be so much more insular. I mean, it's everybody, I think, is, and that's one of the problems with it. It's if you get beaten up by a stranger, you call the police.
Right.
But if you get beaten up by a loved one, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
You're reluctant to do that. There's a lot of shame associated with it, bringing shame on the family.
Well, because the abuser is saying it's your fault.
Right, exactly.
I'm hitting you because you did something wrong.
You did something. You have brought this on. And so there's a lot of shame and guilt, feeling like, if maybe I had just done something differently, said something differently, it would not have come to this. And so a lot of people are just reluctant to go forward because they internalize the message that the batterer sends, mm-hmm. that you're worthless, if you were a different person, I would never have to hit you, and those kinds of things. So.
Right, or if you're financially dependent on that person, or you love that person.
You love them.
That's that very right. confusing thing too.
Right.
You've hurt me. I don't want to hurt you.
Right.
I don't want you to lose your job. I don't want
right.
you to go to jail.
Right.
It's the future of our family and our children.
Absolutely.
It's so darn.
It is
hard.
difficult. It's a challenge, and I think people. What we hear in some of the groups that we've led with women, specifically women, will say, we just want the violence to stop. We don't want the relationship to end.
Right.
And so if we can just get the violence, and so the promises of I'll get counseling, it won't happen again, those resonate, and often victims and survivors say, well, we'll just give it another go. Mm-hmm. I do want to say, though, when we talk about, why someone would stay in a situation, a lot of people overlook the fact that one of the main reasons is that they are afraid, because often they've been threatened, if you leave, I will come and I will harm you. I think it's important to note that in the last few years, we've had several fatalities, domestic violence fatalities here on the peninsula, and in each one of those instances, the female who was killed had left. So we can't always assume that just leaving the relationship is going to solve all of your problems. So
and sometimes you can be gone a while.
Right.
I mean, you could be physically divorced and living separately,
right.
and it's
right.
Jeez.
So the safety planning that has to go into play with leaving a relationship, considering all of the options that you have, is important. And so. When we ask that question often, why does she stay? It's a form of victim blaming. The question really is, how do we stop perpetrators from being abusive? So.
So how do we? Can you fix this?
We also need to remind people that domestic violence is not only battering. There's mental, emotional, financial. There's so many different ways to be a victim who will turn into a survivor.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I do think people think about the classic physical abuse. And in some ways, that's a little easier to identify.
Right.
I have bruises.
Right.
You can see this.
Right.
Whereas emotional abuse or some of the others,
Yeah, right. Well, a lot of times the woman's self-esteem has been beaten down so much that is another reason why they say, because they assume that whatever he has said is true. You know, you can look in the mirror and see his description of you versus your description of what you actually see. You know, no one's gonna love you, no one's gonna take care of you. You would be nothing if it wasn't for me, and you're ugly, you're fat, you know, all kinds of things that they say. And for some women, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
well, some of us don't start out with a whole lot of self-esteem anyway.
Exactly.
You know, or they may have grown up in a family that had, I mean, I know that sometimes those patterns repeat themselves, whether it's because you expected or you pick someone like that. But, you know, you may not have seen a perfect loving relationship between your own parents.
Right. It is sometimes a cyclical thing we see in families, or we've seen some clients come to the organization that when we look back at records, we find out that they're adult children of former clients. And so that kind of speaks to the cyclical nature. If you grow up in a situation where you see a certain pattern of how people behave in relationships, often you think that is the correct way, and then you grow up to repeat it as adults. And
domestic violence is about power and control. It's about the power from one person to control the actions of another person. So, you know, if they have that power over you, then you assume that you have no outlet. So we're trying to make sure that people know there is an outlet. There is resources.
And you guys are that resource.
Yes.
You coordinate. And the other thing is, people don't have to necessarily be ready to leave to call for help.
Absolutely.
They can ask for strategies, they can do planning, they can gather information. Because I'm going to guess that most people don't leave and stay gone after the first phone call. It is a process.
It is. I think statistics we've seen say that on average a victim will leave and go back 6 or 7 times before they leave for good. And that, again, it's a process. It's thinking it through, you know, is this the right step? Sometimes, again, you're brought back into the relationship based on promises. And so it does take a lot of time. And so you can access services simply by calling the hotline, asking for information. We can work with you on safety planning. There's support groups. We actually serve more clients in our outreach services than in our shelter, which a lot of people identify transitions. You're the battered women's shelter.
You're the shelter.
You're the shelter.
Right.
But we actually serve more clients outside of shelter than we do inside of shelter. And
sheltering can be, again, that bigger picture. It isn't always just the physical sheltering. It's helping to provide the protection and the stability
community. Absolutely.
In the community.
We have legal advocates that can work to help survivors get protective orders, which allows them to stay in the community and stay in their home. And so we try to provide resources where folks need us to provide resources. If you need to come into shelter, that's an option. If you just need to talk with an advocate, we have art and play therapy for the children. And the kids are also very important because they witness this. And again, back to the learned behavior, it's important that we work with children so that we educate them that what you may have seen in your family of origin is not necessarily the right way to respond. And we work with kids to heal trauma and also to educate them to become resilient and also develop more healthy relationship skills. And so that's important work that we do too.
It is so important because you look at those kids, and you know, I used to be a volunteer, as I told you many years ago. But even just playing with the kids or listening to what they say, when kids grow up around violence, it's what they, it's what they enact, and it becomes a part of normal for them.
It
and
does.
you have to really work very hard
Very
to change
hard.
that. Or the little boys, you know, who were victims as little boys grow up to be that
In some
potentially,
cases.
not
Potential,
all, of
not
course,
all,
but it,
not all,
you know,
not all.
it can happen.
Absolutely. It's really important that we kind of work with kids, and I think one of the myths is that what we hear a lot of the clients, we say, well, they don't know, they didn't hear anything, they didn't see anything, they're upstairs. We all know that children are sponges.
Yeah, they
absorb
hear a
everything.
lot.
You know, if they didn't necessarily see a physical act, they absorb the emotional, the intensity in the home, which surrounds those type of events, and so they are impacted. And so the sooner we can kind of work with kids and help heal the trauma, but again, help build their understanding of what healthy relationships are, because they start even in school. I mean, you know, you want them to develop healthy friendships and peer relationships in school, and then as they age and come into more formal adult relationships, how to handle conflict, how to communicate effectively. Those things are really important.
Okay, so let's assume that I'm somebody at home listening to this, and I'm nodding my head. I'm like, I know what they're talking about. What advice would you have for me? Pick up the phone?
Pick up the
Well,
phone.
yeah. Pick up the phone and call the hotline, and the hotline is the end to all the services. If you let them know a little bit about what your issue is, and they can direct you to who may be able to assist you.
Confidential services is
Right.
important to know. I think that's, you know, everyone needs to be aware. It's obviously very confidential. We don't discuss cases with anyone. You know, what you tell us stays private. And we, as Sylvia said, will do the best that we can to direct you to the right resource within our organization, or sometimes even outside of our organization. You asked about, you know, how can we make this stop? How do we make perpetrators reconsider their behavior? Well, we work with a partner organization, the Center for Child and Family Services, which runs a batterers group. So we can help victims often who are not necessarily ready to leave the relationship, but want to offer their partner services.
And maybe their partner wants to change.
And maybe they
'cause
want.
that, you know,
Absolutely.
some people do.
That can happen. That can happen. We always say though, if he's saying that he's going to get counseling,
Then let's bring him right in here and see if it's true.
Let's see it through first and make sure he actually goes. But in the meantime, let's still work on your safety plan in case it doesn't happen. So all of those things can be brought to bear. I mean, we are not in the position to tell you as a victim or survivor what you should do. We're here to offer resources, give guidance as best we can based on our history and knowledge of this subject and what we've just from experience 37 years in the community. But we're here to help you take the steps that you need to take. We're not going to tell you what steps to take.
We're not going to say, come in
we're not going to
tonight.
tell you, right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And we also want them to understand that we're not here to judge them. We're here to assist them. It will become a partnership. You know, we will be their partner support. So it's very important that they understand that, because a lot of them, you know, because there's shame and things like that, they don't want to come and tell somebody else their story because, you know, that person may look down on them or whatever, you know, and we ask that family and friends don't give up on them, because
That was one of the things I was going to ask, because I know I've always been approached by family members or friends who want to do something. They see the situation, they want to get involved. They're maybe frustrated that the victim isn't listening to them at that moment and doing what they expect.
Right, but it's up to them to just be a support system and not a judgment system, and not I'm going to tell you what you need to do system. We need them to be a support system.
And to stick with it.
Right,
Stick
and
with it.
stick with it.
Right.
Because
Don't give up.
a lot of times that is what the batterer wants. They want to alienate them
And
from family and
isolate,
friends. So
It's
you
that
know,
power and control.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And it can't be understandable, obviously, as a family or friend watching this go on with someone that you love. So we say, when you get frustrated, just tell them to call us,
Right.
and we'll
listen.
We'll listen.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listen and not judge. And then
Absolutely.
if you want next steps, you can help them with next steps.
Right.
But if all they need right then is someone to listen to them,
ear. Call the hotline 24 hours a day. You can access the hotline and just talk if that's what you want to do.
And we continue to go out into the community to make sure that the community is aware of some of the dynamics and educate the community. We do sessions at social services and different places like that where they have people coming in doing classes, and we join into their partnership. so those people can understand. Because a lot of people think, well, he hasn't hit me, so I'm not I have never been abused, and a lot of times it's really amazing what they say in those classes, and that's an opportunity to use a teaching moment.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Okay, so your services include the hotline, listening, legal help,
legal advocacy, children's services.
When necessary, sheltering, temporary sheltering,
emergency
and
shelter.
then you help the woman maybe get out in a more permanent sort of way.
My services is all inclusive, but I work with them to help them find employment and housing, and then I work with them as an outreach client once they're into housing, and it just continues on, until they are truly self-sufficient. And then I still have clients who I still am in contact with from years ago. So, yeah.
Now the other thing is we are using partially stereotyped, but supported by numbers, and saying the woman is the victim and the male is the batterer, and that is not universally true.
It is not universally
true.
In
some portion, I don't know what percentage.
We about 5 to 9% of our clients are men. I think it's important to know that the statistics say that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will be victims of intimate partner violence in their lifetime. So it's very important for us to let the community know, men in our community know that services are also available for men.
And there's a little more shame involved there because you think, I'm the man,
Absolutely.
I think there's a bigger stigma even in terms of coming forward.
And that's exactly what we hear from men, that they're reluctant to come forward because they don't want to be seen as weak, and you let your wife beat you up, you let your girlfriend beat you up, and so it is often harder for them to come forward. But the same services are available, confidential services, support, shelter if that's necessary, legal advocacy. A lot of the men that we see through court systems, because now law enforcement are, they recognize it, and they have to arrest the person who is the primary aggressor, and it's not always the man that is. And so a lot of men come to our attention through the court system, and so we offer them the same level of service that we do for women.
Okay, so how are you funded?
Well, funded. We serve Hampton, Newport News, and York County, so we receive funding from each of those municipalities that we serve. We're also a United Way agency, partner agency.
So we can donate.
You can donate, obviously. When United Way season comes along, you can designate Transitions Family Violence Services, yes. We also receive several federal, state grants targeting this specific population. We have a HUD grant that we also, in addition to emergency shelter, we do have transitional housing as well, where clients can live for up to a year and receive services. So just a kind of a hodgepodge of funding, and also just the generosity of the community. We get a lot of community support, whether it's money, but also resources in kind. We get donations weekly. Folks come to our office.
Get rooms remade. I know
Absolutely.
I've seen people that came in and redid an apartment or redid one of the rooms or your living room or whatever.
Absolutely. And the donations we receive from the community are very helpful because that cuts down on the cost of things that we have to buy for clients. So we have a donation day on Wednesdays. Folks can give us a call and bring us their donations, and we greatly appreciate that.
Okay. Well, let's recap your phone number, because I think that's the most important thing. If you have a friend or a family member you know is in trouble, if you are in trouble, if you need to talk and say, I'm not sure, let's call that hotline.
723-7774.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry there's a need for your services in the community.
We're glad to be here.
And I know you're working to reduce that need,
Absolutely.
But it is a welcome thing that you're here when people need you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Marcy. And thank you, Sylvia, for coming by today. And thank you. I hope you've learned a little bit more about both domestic violence, what it is, broader definition than you may think, and what to do if you or someone you know is in that situation. Thanks for watching.